I'm here with V-Expert and partner at Actual Tech Media, Mr. James Green. James, how you doing?
I'm awesome, David. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for being on today's EcoCast event. We're talking about VDI and EUC, and I assume you've got some experience in that. Why don't you start off by telling us what is your background regarding VDI?
Sure. Yeah, in a past life, I started out specializing in virtualization and then narrowed in even more to VDI and EUC. So I've got experience working both on the customer side in federal and insurance, and then at a VAR where I saw all kinds of VDI deployments, also in higher ed, in healthcare. And so I've seen VDI deployed across lots of different types of businesses and in all different sizes. And so I've seen how it goes when there's 20 seats of VDI, and I've deployed global VDI infrastructure with thousands of seats.
Awesome, awesome. So you've got a lot. I know you've got a lot of experience in this area. I mean, why, in your experience, are companies moving to VDI? What are the benefits? Why does it attract? What is it about at VDI that attracts both the business as well as the IT organization?
There's certainly an efficiency that comes with adopting VDI, much the same as people have experienced with server virtualization. You can, from a cost standpoint, from a management standpoint, there are some efficiencies to be had. Now, if you do it wrong, you can lose those efficiencies. But there's other reasons besides, for instance, it makes the standardization across your endpoint device process simpler, as opposed to having 20 different kinds of desktops deployed throughout your organization. You can deploy one kind of endpoint, and then all the actual desktop computing is managed in the back end. So it can be cheaper, but more importantly, for a lot of organizations, it's easier to manage. It also can be quite a bit more secure, because instead of having endpoints floating around wherever, on a plane to Dubai, with all the data living on them, you send out these dumb devices that just connect back to the gold that lives in the data center. And so it's protected in the same way as all your other data center resources are protected. And you can secure it at a much higher level in a lot of cases. So especially in the industries that are higher regulated, bound by more compliance kind of stuff, VDI can be pretty attractive. And it's a lot easier to upgrade and maintain. So instead of having to go throughout your global organization and replace laptops, you can actually upgrade the hardware on the back end, upgrade the software on the back end, and start rolling this stuff out without having to have 20 people out swapping out laptops.
Nice, nice. So greater manageability, greater efficiency, greater security, and potentially some cost savings. But you also sort of alluded to in there, if you do it right. And I've heard a lot of, stories about failed VDI implementations. And I mean, I get the idea that it's delicate, kind of like messing with, your phone service. I mean, and moving to a voice over IP phone system or something like that. When people pick up the phone, they just expect the phone to work. They hear a dial tone, and whether it's a cell phone or a traditional wired phone, they just expect it to work. And when it comes to their desktop, they just expect it to work, as well. So by changing where the operating system and the applications run, you run some inherent risks with that. What kind of, failures have you seen, and what were the causes of those?
That's an interesting parallel that I hadn't thought about, but the really risky thing about VDI is just like communications. Compared to a lot of things you might do in the data center, it's very visible. And so the end users are your biggest hurdle to a successful VDI deployment. So all the way out at the edge, at the user level, I would say the biggest cause for failure in any VDI deployment is a poor end user experience. And there's a lot of things that can cause that, but if at the end of the day, they're trying to do their work and they know that when I was on my laptop, it used to work fine. And now that I'm using your fancy VDI thing, doing my work is just miserable. Ultimately, your project is not going to succeed. So not providing a good end user experience is one of the reasons projects fail. And what can cause that is any number of things, some of the most common of which are poorly performing storage. That's probably the top of the list, because a lot of businesses that have tried to do this have failed to realize that the VDI workload footprint is a lot different than the server virtualization workload footprint they're used to dealing with. So they wind up with improperly spec'd and configured storage. That can cause problems. And one of the other big reasons I've seen problems is improper networking for the same reason. When I have all the applications living locally on my laptop and I go to a meeting in the UK, everything runs locally and everything is, close to the processing, with the exception of maybe some database or something that's back in the data center. When we move to a VDI model, all of a sudden everything is back in the data center, and I need a pretty strong, high bandwidth, low latency connection back to the data center to have the same kind of experience, and that's not always accounted for. So not specing the infrastructure properly can be a big problem. One of the others is not understanding the end user behaviors and the way applications interact with each other well enough. Because, for example, if you've got an environment filled with desktop computers and everybody comes in to start their day and they log on, makes no difference to you. In a VDI environment, about 8 o'clock, 8:15, everybody comes in and starts logging on. You've got tens, hundreds, thousands of machines all trying to do a ton of I/O at once, and it can just cripple your VDI infrastructure. So you have to account for that. So understanding the way that users will interact with VDI is really important.
So understanding the server or the data center infrastructure required to provide these end user desktops. And I mean, end user desktops, the whole experience isn't just like one file. A single end user desktop could be made up of hundreds of files that just make everything happen. And then the end user behavior, the login storms, things like that can happen. And then understanding the applications and the network, behavior. Great points, James. So, if somebody's planning to implement VDI today, or maybe they're struggling with the VDI infrastructure already, what are some of the tips that you recommend?
So I've got 5 tips for viewers of today's event for how to have a successful VDI deployment. The first one is to understand the business case for deploying VDI, because VDI can be, in certain cases, in a lot of cases, hard to get support for. And so once you've got it and you've got the buy-in, you need to understand why the business has decided to do this and focus on those things. So if it's a security play, obviously you have to focus on end user experience, but focus heavily on making sure it's the most secure. There will be hangups, and so making sure that you're delivering on the main reason why the business has chosen to adopt VDI will make sure you continue to get support for your project.
Okay.
The next one is to relentlessly pursue the ideal end user experience. Like I said, users are the #1 reason that VDI projects fail. They have a poor experience, they complain, they get together and complain, and next thing you know, your project is derailed and it's not going to go well. So second only to focusing on why the business has chosen to deploy VDI, you have to focus on the end user experience and make sure it's stellar. Next is to get some help from experienced VDI deployers, whether that's an infrastructure manufacturer that's going to help you with some of the underlying infrastructure for this project, or from your VAR, but find somebody who's done this before, preferably at scale, and get their wisdom and experience, because this is likely different than a lot of things that you've done before. A VDI EUC deployment has a lot of different facets to it than a standard server virtualization or cloud project. And so I would recommend that instead of figuring out on your own, learn from their mistakes, get the knowledge that they have. Fourth is to use the best measurement tools to understand what's happening as you deploy this. A good example of that is in a lot of successful VDI deployments I've seen customers, I was very focused on VMware. I've seen them use VMware's vRealize operations tool with the Horizon Suite plugin to be able to visualize the environment end to end, all the way from the end user at the desktop, all the way through the infrastructure down to the storage, the network, and the servers and everything in between, because one of the downsides to VDI is troubleshooting can get a lot harder. The scope of troubleshooting a desktop is a desktop. The scope of troubleshooting a VDI desktop is, there's a lot more things in the chain there that are involved. So having a good tool to be able to visualize that is really important. And lastly, I would recommend taking it slow and using a group of testers to test your deployments before you roll them out to a broader group, because like I said, once you start getting people unhappy with the deployment and complaining, you're going to start to lose support for this project. If you can roll it out to 5 or 10 and catch the problems before you roll it out to 100, you're going to reduce the attack surface of your project, for lack of a better word. You provide less of an opportunity for people to undermine your project.
Excellent tips, James. Thank you so much for your time today and your experience around VDI. For more information, to contact James, you can follow him on Twitter at JD Green and check out his blog posts over at actualtech.io. Thanks, James.
Thanks so much, David. Appreciate it.